Many of us need to learn what happens to kiddos when they go through trauma and how that impacts them sitting in our classroom and how they take in your information. So our goal today is to deepen your understanding and give you some key takeaways. There's the bear. How many of you have ever seen a bear in the wild? Anybody? Okay, a few of you have. Kind of exciting, right? A little scary. When I was a kid, we went to the Smoky Mountains, and I wanted to see a bear. My brother and sister and I, we wanted to see a bear, and my parents were like, I don't think we want to find a bear on a trail to a waterfall. One particular time we realized that 2 days after we hiked to Laurel Falls, they saw a bear on the trail. We missed it. We were so disappointed. I think my parents were secretly glad we didn't meet that. Well, fast forward a few years, we took our kids, our boys when they were little, and we went to the Smoky Mountains. Oh, we want to see a bear. I said, I don't know if you're going to see a bear. I've been to the Smoky Mountains 2 or 3 times as a kid and never saw a bear. Famous last words. Cades Cove last day, everybody's stopping, people are walking. Well, long story short, there's bear cubs up in a tree in the middle of the field. And we watched from a distance. Some crazy mama wanted to get a picture up close and had a toddler by the hand and was taking her camera. And I said, oh, honey, you have no idea. But you have a different perspective as a parent about seeing the bear. I had a different perspective. Last time we saw bear in the Great Smoky Mountains was when we were driving in a car. We were driving some of the trails, and we saw the bear up. And I felt pretty safe in the car. But the reason that there's a little element of fear is why?
There's Mama.
Because Mama's going to come get you. And so we see bear in the wild, and we like to keep our distance because we know there's danger. Now, for those of you that haven't seen bear in the wild, how many of you seen bear at the zoo? Seen it, right? But still, a fearsome animal, but separated with the distance, right? The big moat, the wire cages, the bars, and you feel pretty safe. Well, think about that fear and what that induces and kind of seeing that bear and being so glad that there's something separating you. And you're just visiting a bear on an occasion. When we talk about trauma and how it affects kiddos, we're not talking about an occasional visit to the zoo or seeing the bear out in the wild with a safe distance. We're talking about the bear that lives in their house. See the difference in that fear? For me, that's what the bears represent. It's a different level of fear because it's daily. Now, even if they're out of the traumatic experience, we'll talk about that and what research has shown us that way. But I want to talk to you first then, what are the sources? What are the bears that live in their house, quote unquote? So we're going to look at 6 bears or 6 risk factors. And if you have kiddos in your care that you teach, youth that you interact with, these are 6 areas that would induce for them that feeling of living like a bear is in my house. They might not be able to tell that to you or express that to you, but what has happened in their early childhood development is that felt safety is gone. So these are some of the bears that could occur. A stressful pregnancy. You think, oh, well, if mama was under a lot of stress, research has shown, what's the stress hormone? Cortisol. Okay, so mama's cortisol is going to be where if she's stressed out. And do you know that stress hormone can permeate the womb and in fact impact the kiddo? So that's a bear that can cause trauma to the developing child. The trauma in development is exponentially greater than the trauma you would experience as an adult. When you have trauma in a developing baby body and brain, the impacts are amplified greatly. So when we're talking about that newborn, if it was a difficult labor or delivery, if if there were some medical crises, if it was incredibly long, issues with the baby themselves or with the mother that would cause stress, again, cortisol, but medical complications. That can be a bear. Now you're thinking, how? How can that be? I mean, if I was born under a difficult labor and delivery, I'm not going to remember it. I can't tell you about that. Maybe my mother could tell me. But the body knows. The body keeps the score. It's actually a title of a very good book. Early childhood hospitalization. And we understand that this is traumatic because a lot of our children's hospitals are very good at making a difference in kids' lives and using different things to help them get over that fear and trauma of being in the hospital. But that is a difficulty. Now, these last three are the ones that you probably think of first. And the last three are also associated to, and I'm sure you've heard of the ACEs study, and many of them have been done, but the original works that were done with the CDC and Kaiser Permanente, the Adverse Childhood Experience Study, the risk factors that they defined fall into these last three categories. Okay, abuse of any kind, and it says, I don't like you. Abuse says, I don't like you. But neglect and the last one, abandonment, are actually worse. Anybody know why?
I don't want you.
I don't want you, or
I don't care.
I don't care, or even worse, you don't exist. Okay? You don't exist. So abuse says, I don't like you. Neglect or abandonment says, you don't exist. And that's traumatic. Those are the bears, those fear-inducing factors that we might not even understand. But our body has memory, our brain has memory, our cells have memory. There's a story of a little guy who was placed in an orphanage in Romania before he was a year old. He was adopted at about the age of 18 months. He first came to the U.S. and did very well with his family, and then things started falling apart, and Dane just started melting down and having problems, and they couldn't figure out what it was, and he was so angry. And as he grew up, he came under the care and got into the program with Texas Christian University and Dr. Karen Purvis and Dr. David Cross. And Dr. Purvis was able to work with him and make progress with him. But it was very profound one day when Mama has this 10-year-old who's melting down, and she is giving him some felt safety and some nurturing that he missed as an infant. She's holding him and stroking him, and, you know, it's okay, Dane, it's okay, buddy, I'm right here. And he is melting down, and he's calming, and he looks off, and he screams at her, don't choke me. And her hands were nowhere around his neck. You know, she's doing this, and then he calmed completely down. And that seemed to be a turning point, and she thought, how can he really? He got placed in the orphanage at about 9 months. Is it possible? How could a child younger than 9 months remember, if anybody? And when Dr. Purvis came that day to do some work with them, she said, Karen, this is what happened. Is it possible that Dane could remember? Karen said, it's highly likely. These cells, what do you do when you see a little baby? This, right? Yeah, these cells have the greatest amount of memory of any cells in our body. And they did a little bit of investigation through the orphanage and found out indeed that Mama had tried to choke the baby before the baby came to the orphanage. That little guy didn't even know what was causing him to melt down until he came to a place of complete felt safety and connection. Then he was able to say, and that began a turnaround for him. Dane's in his 20s today. He's a great young man. he has a service dog that helps him with some of his anxiety issues, but he lives on his own and he has a job. He was smart. He named his dog Hershey, and when he comes home every day, he gets Hershey kisses. He loves it. But you can overcome that. But those types of things impact us. So don't think that if things are great for your kids walking in the door, you don't know what they've come from. If they've come from something that they can't even technically remember, it still can cause effect. So these are the 6 bears that we consider. Now, these can damage the developing brain and body. These can have an effect, and I want to talk about what is damaged.
Sorry, just a quick question, just because, you know, where we are in our county teaching, we've got a fairly high teen pregnancy rate. So would the stressful pregnancy, the difficult labor and delivery, and, you know, possibly, would that be the same for a teenager in her pregnancy and then coming to school? Would she have those same sort of
Stressful
effects as
situation,
being
and that's
a baby?
impacting the baby. Now, it's going to have
impacting her.
It will,
Okay.
and here's the key. Infant development, newborn, you know, brain just developing. Her brain is further developed, but she's a teenager. There's a lot of brain changes that happen. Now, we used to think the most malleable times were those infant to early childhood and the teenage years, the adolescent years. But recent research has shown us even more, because we're doing more with magnetic resonance imaging and SPECT imaging, that we can see your brains, no matter how old you are in this room, your brains change every year. So yes, those types of things are impacting her as well. They probably, because of the fact that the newborn is just growing and developing, the impact on the newborn is going to be greater than the impact on her, but it is impacting her. And my question would be, you know, what kind of impacts did she maybe have as a child? See, that's what I face when I worked with foster families and foster kiddos, and then less than half the time they were unified with birth parents. And that's a journey, but my question is, these birth parents have had the same problems. Okay? They've experienced the same trauma. So you have an adult trying to parent a child that is dealing with this, and the child is dealing with that, and we need to teach them tools to be able to change. I mean, this is, you think, oh, this is so much bad news. It's not all bad news. There is good news, and that's what I want to tell you. But you have to keep in mind the big picture, and that's great. I love the way you're thinking. These are the bears. These are the things that can cause trauma. You think, okay, once we get beyond that, does it still have an effect? Well, I gave you the example of Dane, and you can see that has effect. And a researcher wanted to take a look at, okay, what is that effect like? And I know it's not people, but he used rats, and he didn't use a cat. My cat would love to do that. I don't think she'd know what to do if she caught a mouse or a rat. But this researcher, in 1998, Jack Pansep, he did some in-depth studies on young rat pups. And he got them together, they were in their cages, and he watched them for 4 days straight play with just reckless abandon, like only little kids can. You know, that's so fun to watch. These little rats are doing the same thing. Rough and tumble and having a blast. And he wanted to introduce to the rats a stressor, like a traumatic event kind of thing, a stressor, and then remove it and see if after the removal they would kind of go back to their rough and tumble and be okay. So what he did was, what is the enemy of rats and mice? Cat. Okay? These were baby rats. They had never seen a cat, never been around a cat. So he took a cat hair and put it in their cage area. And he put that cat hair in there. He left it in there for only 24 hours, and then he removed it. What do you think happened?
Freak them out.
It freaked them out. It did. What do you think happened to their rough and tumble play? They're just kind of a little nervous, scared. they ceased their playing. When that cat hair appeared, they ceased their playing. It completely stopped. After the cat hair was removed, the play never returned to the level that it was before. That, to me, is the most powerful part of this experiment. The play never returned to the level it was before. So once this signal of danger was introduced, even briefly, it changed everything. For them, life was never the same. So the kiddos that you have coming into your programs, into your classrooms, even though they may be, in foster care, or their parents have gotten things together, or things have changed, or they're in a different situation and they're away from the stressor, they are still carrying the impacts of that cat hair. So now you see why this is about bears, rats and bears and cats. The cat hair is still impacting them. And you need to understand that as your kiddos come in. That's part of their DNA. That's part of what their life is like. Okay, now how badly have your kids been affected by the cat hair? Let me answer that question for you. You'd think, wow, it's just got to be a universal effect here. Well, the good news is it's only 5 things, but they're pretty big things. The cool thing is what we've learned when we look at these 5 things. I want to flip it over and show you what we've learned on how we can reverse. And that's where a lot of your teaching and your intervention comes in. You're actually working to reverse some of those things. So that's where I want you to be able to drop this into. So we're going to look at the 5 risk factors, the 5 effects of the cat hair. If a kiddo has had a cat hair dropped in their life, that's stressor. Even if it's been removed, there are 5 areas that have been affected. Anybody have some guesses before I throw them up there?
Education or learning.
Okay, their ability to learn.
Ability to attach.
Ability to attach, yeah, that's emotional.
Relationship problems.
Relationship. Anything else?
Trust, abandonment.
Trust, yeah, trust, abandonment, huge things. Now I'm going to give them to you in the terms of 5 Bs, and some of the things you're talking about are emotional in nature, and those will relate to some of these Bs because that's part of behavior. And these 5 Bs were outlined by Dr. Karen Purvis of the Texas Institute of Child Development, which is renamed after her, Karen Purvis Institute of Child Development. 2 years ago, this coming spring, she went to be with the Lord. She passed away of cancer, but this was her life work. And she has put together a fantastic work, The Connected Child, she and Dr. David Cross. So I'd highly recommend this paperback. But I just love, she says it better than I can. She has 5 Bs. The first one is the brain. The brain is affected by the stress of the trauma. Now, I'll let you write that one down, and then I'm going to ask you to get out your brain model. You all brought your brain model, didn't you, today? Did you bring it? Anybody have your brain model with you? Do you have your fist? You have your fist? You've done this. Some of you have done this, right? That's your brain model, but I want you to use this to remember, okay? When a kiddo experiences a lot of stress, this is the downstairs brain, the brain stem. This little guy here is the amygdala, the hippocampus that's in here, and up here, this is it's actually the upstairs brain, we like to call it, but that's the prefrontal lobe here. That's where executive power, decision making. Some of you are teaching kiddos to what? Make what kind of choices?
Good choices.
Good choices. So this is where you want them to be, right? They have to get up here. Okay, let me tell you how the brain of a kiddo that's experienced trauma is different. So it's going to take a little bit of work to get up there, okay? This kiddo has experienced fear and trauma, so they're living with the amygdala saying, we're in trouble, and the downstairs brain saying, rightly, we need to either fight, flight, or freeze in order to survive. And they keep doing that and doing that and doing that. So you know what? They've dug a pretty good-sized basement, right? They're used to survival mode. Keep this phrase in mind. What fires together, wires together. those pathways in the brain, neurons in the brain synapses. Boy, these pathways down here, they're pretty good. What has not happened, however, is they haven't gotten upstairs very often. It's like you digging this size of this room in a basement, and the house that you're going to put on top of it is the size of this table. Kind of crazy, isn't it? But because they haven't gotten to the upstairs brain as often, those pathways haven't been firing. They're not wired. That spells trouble for some of your programs, right? Because you're trying to get kiddos to think, to make different choices, trying to get them up there. So keep that in mind. The brain is impacted. Now, the beautiful thing is, if what fires together wires together, and the brain is always changing and developing, what can happen? We can change. If we know this, we can be aware, and we need to move them up out of the downstairs brain, up into the upstairs brain. So we need to do a few things so that they're not always going to that survival mode, and we'll talk about that. The other thing that's affected is the body. Key for you to remember, and we've got kiddos even in our church ministry, and I know I remind our youth pastor of this sometimes. We have a teenager. So you have to remember, it may say on his birth certificate, and he may technically be 12 years old or 14 years old. But developmentally, if they've had trauma in their lives, some of those bears, it's likely that they can be up to half of their biological age in emotional age. The emotional age would be half of the biological age, which might explain some of the things you see in the classroom. You start looking at the kiddo and you're saying, good night, they're 15, they ought to be able to handle this. Okay, now cut that in half. That's their emotional age. Does that explain a little bit? Yes, ma'am.
Can it also be that they act way more mature because they've always been in survival?
Oh, it depends on their response to it, and particularly they may act more mature if they're in a situation where they're an oldest having to replace the parent. Which when kids are placed in care, when they need to be placed in foster care, there are times that, and I know it doesn't, you say, why would you do that? It doesn't sound nice. That actually they'll place an oldest in a home with older siblings and place youngers in a different home. And you say, that's so cruel to separate the family. Well, it's that problem. It's this kiddo has always had to be responsible much farther than their age. They need to be a kid. They need to let their hair down and let somebody else take care of them, because then it becomes a control issue. Then if you're the teacher in the class, you can't take charge and be in control, because their mechanism is not to run and it's not to freeze, it's to fight, and the way they fight is control. Okay, so you got it. Yeah, you're right on that. And I hope that helps you to understand. Sometimes you may hear about placement and say, why did they split those kids up? Well, wait a minute. Do a little thinking, because they're trying to help that oldest child as well. So it does affect the body. It affects the biology. If you've got higher levels of different types of hormones flying around in that development, your adrenaline and your cortisol, and then you don't have enough of the dopamine and different things, it affects the child's biology. So we see a number of issues biologically, and that can cause some of the special needs that we see oftentimes with kiddos that come from trauma. And some of those are met with a need for medication. Some of those are treated through therapy and other things of that nature. But their biology is affected. I mean, literally the development of their body. They might have be affected to the point that we know that, for example, reading comes because of the myelinization of the central nervous system. That's part of biology. You say, well, reading is education. No, it's part of biology too. Hey, boys, sorry guys, but your myelinization is a little bit slower, okay? My oldest son read at such a young age. I home educated them, and then my second son, who does not have my learning style. Wow, that was a really tough one. He could not read. He could tell me the letter, tell me the sound, tell me everything I wanted about it, but if you strung those letters together, he couldn't string that sound together. And as I continued to do more research and understood, it's just having a different, that's the last thing to myelinize is the fine motor skills and the process of reading and that coordination. It's like, oh, now he's an incredible athlete and all those kinds of things. It was just a timing thing for him. And once it clicked, it clicked. But if you imagine that a kiddo that's been through trauma, his body is growing and developing, and he's having different types of hormones going on in different levels that shouldn't be where they're not shouldn't be at, it's going to mess with development. So some learning disabilities and things of that nature may be his or her lot because of the body and its development. We find too that we use a lot of intervention in different things that are used as well for special needs kiddos. A lot of these kiddos wind up with special needs, but some of our kiddos that come from trauma actually benefit from the use of, for example, the weighted blanket, the proprioceptive, the deep proprioceptive pressure just to calm them down. Some of them need to spin because they need that vestibular stimulation. It's because of the way their biology was impacted, that impacted their body. Their beliefs are different, and we touched on some of that. The trauma, whatever it was, they're going to think of their own reason why it happened, and oftentimes they think they're the cause. So their belief system is different, and they feel like they don't matter. Or they feel like, as you just wisely pointed out, that they got to be in charge of it all. And that belief system was changed because of the trauma. So different belief systems. Finally, their behaviors are different. Now, you already talked about some behaviors, but I want to tell you this. They're different in another way. They're not just different in some of the ways that you spoke of. They're also different in a way that they're speaking a different language. I'm going to give you an example, and then we'll see just a little bit of this video, hopefully. But for example, if one of my kids, if I told them, if I said, it's time to put things away and we're going to move on and we have errands to run, and they threw a little hairy fit, they're all grown now, so I can say that, they need some correction because they know how to respond to me and their needs are met. They've been well cared for. This is not a trust issue here. It isn't that they don't feel safe. They just don't want to do what Mom wants them to do. I don't want to go run those stupid errands. I want to keep playing with my toys. But if a kiddo that comes from hard places, you say, hey, bud, it's time to go. We're going to go run some errands. Let's go right now. And you've been from a hard place and you just throw a fit. It is not necessarily that you're telling me I won't do that. Like I would say, my kids, if they did that, they're telling me I won't. They're throwing that little hairy toe over the line and saying, I dare you. Because they need to know that they're protected. And that's okay. That's the dance that we have as parents. But if you're from hard places and you're doing that, you're not necessarily always telling me that you won't do it. Sometimes you're telling me, I can't do it. I can't do it. Because in that example, I didn't give you any warning about this transition. So boom, you're going to stop this and go to that, and I'm taking you into an unknown, and you know what unknowns have been like in your life. And they haven't been pretty. So that, I want you to understand that some of the behaviors that you might normally interpret one way from kiddos, even in the classroom, may not be so. May be telling you something else. And I'll give you a few more examples as we move along. And again, this is from Doctors Purvis and Cross, The Connected Child. And this sounds rough. This sounds like, oh my goodness, so how are we ever going to overcome this? But the cool thing is, what was damaged and the way it was damaged, particularly the control center, the brain, the amazing thing is there's hope. Because what fires together, wires together. Okay, if we know what didn't fire together properly, perhaps now we can fix that and go back. And that's the goal, that's the hope. What we're going to do is just watch, if it comes up. If it doesn't, I don't have time to wait for it. This is from, there it goes. We're just going to see 2 minutes, almost 3 minutes of this. This is from, if you want to search any more of these videos, you can search TBRI videos on YouTube. There are a lot of little videos. TBRI, Trust-Based Relational Intervention. There are a lot of good resources out there. This is one that I think they have the best tools for caregivers. But we're going to just hear a little bit about children from hard places in the brain, because the brain is the control center of all those other effects. The brain is the control center of the body, the behavior, all the other effects. So let's just watch and listen. And we're going to watch 3 minutes of this. Oh, stop.
The human brain is a wondrous machine.
And I have the volume maxed up here.
Literally from birth, our brains are exploring, reacting.
Oh, okay, it just stopped. Okay, I'm not going to mess with this because we don't have a lot of time. I'm going to tell you that it goes over the human brain. You meet, I really wanted you to hear Dr. Purvis. She's a wonderful, gracious woman. She is a child whisperer. But she talks about what's impacted, but the fact that we know that it's impacted, we can make changes. There is hope. Kids don't have to stay there. And that's where we want to get to in this presentation. So I wanted you to know what the cause was, the why, what did it affect, and then the next part is, okay, what are we going to do about it? How can you do something about it? The past affects the future. Well, we just have discussed that, but does not have to determine it. So the kiddos that you see and you meet, their past affects their future, but doesn't have to determine it. And thank goodness for that window of light, for that good news. So we're going to talk a little bit about that and about how we can change and create new pathways for the brain. Much of what you do in the classroom and working with kiddos, there are ways that you can address it that will help. Kids come into your classrooms having a bear in their past and are still reacting to that cat hair, okay? We're also going to get to this point, so I'm going to just throw this out here, kind of a little foreshadowing. Some of your content is a cat hair, right?
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
Right? Okay. Don't dance around it, but we're going to talk about that. So the rest of the session, I want to get to tools. And the last part we're going to talk about is a powerful thing that these kiddos need to learn, that if they don't have it, I don't care how much you teach them, they will not follow through. Okay? So let's move on here. The first thing, overcoming the cat hair. Here are the 3 keys that I want you to remember. There's a lot that we can focus on, but we're going to focus on these 3 keys. We've got to start somewhere. Okay? We've got to start somewhere. Relationship, connecting, and some of you talked about that, but giving them a trusting relationship. A connection is key. Felt safety. Key word is felt. Self-regulation. We want to battle that natural fight, flight, or freeze mode. And remember, get them from downstairs brain to upstairs brain. More executive power. We don't need them flipping their lids. Even as you teach them skills, get in the midst of a situation that you've taught them this, they practice this, and they get in the midst of a situation, and the amygdala is firing up with fear, and boy, that downstairs brain's really strong, so guess what? They're going to flip their lid, and their upstairs brain is going to disengage, and they're going to fight, flight, or freeze. So we don't want them flipping their lid. So this is where we want to work, and I'm going to ask you to put your thinking caps on, your application, and try to figure out how this can work for you. Let's talk about relationship. This is what I'm talking about, and I want you to give me some hows. How are you going to do this? Okay, relationship. I'm talking about connecting with kids, with young people, with youth that come into your classrooms, that you go in to teach, that you work with. Eye contact is huge.
Smiles.
Smiles are huge. Let me tell you this, okay? Connecting, eye contact. Teachers at an elementary school, they wanted to use this at their open house. They wanted to pick two tools, connecting and empowering. One connecting tool, one empowering tool. So they asked all their teachers at the parent night, at the beginning of school, the open house, that when their students came to the door, that they would get down and look them in the eye and say, oh, I'm so glad to have you here, and talk to them. And they also asked their teachers, because they want to reinforce a trusting relationship with their caregiver, they'd ask the parent, what's your name? Gladys. Gladys, I'm so glad that you brought Grant here. Now, if Grant asks and needs a hug or a pat on the shoulder, do we have permission to give that to him? And while Grant is here, do we have permission to be the boss? No. Oh, Grant might not be able to stay because Grant has to obey in the classroom. So can we be the boss of him just in the classroom? Okay. Now, what are we teaching Grant? What are we teaching Grant?
They trust it.
Unless parent says, then it's not, I'm not going to do that. And mom said it's okay if I'm the boss of you just for today, just to make sure that everything's okay in the classroom. Right? So it's relationship, eye contact, and that was how they applied it. Now, you can think in your context, you think, oh, wait a minute, my classroom isn't like that, or I don't come in to teach like that, other things are going on. That's why all of you have different scenarios. Physical touch, and I'm going to jump right into this right now. It used to be that people would say, oh, kids that have been sexually abused, don't touch them. Oh, my goodness. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? Now we're learning, and research is proving they need healthy touch. Okay. A side hug. With permission?
Yeah.
With permission? Got that?
Yeah, permission.
Now, some that have been through abuse with physical touch need to learn personal space and a bubble, and we get that, and we use little hula hoops to teach that. But healthy touch is good. For so long we were, are you kidding me? They're dying for healthy touch, that warm, hand. High fives, funky handshakes. Fun things to connect. I really admire, what was the one, I saw it last year, the school teacher, they showed a video. He had a handshake for every kid. I think he had a class of 20 kids. And I'm like, are you kidding me? Number one, how do you come up with 20 handshakes? Number two, how do you remember them all? But that was his way, physical touch, and it was unique. You know what it told the kiddo? You're important.
Yeah.
You're special. What do they believe from their trauma? I don't count. It's my fault. I don't matter. And you're totally slaying that giant. You're one voice, but you know what? You're one voice. More than what they have. Hopefully they have other teachers and other people that are inputting. Physical touch and your voice, the way you use your voice. Even when you have to correct, and that's why I really am going to encourage you, because I think she has the best example, and I'm probably pretty biased because I've been trained as well through Texas Christian University's Karen Purvis's Institute of Child Development. But if you listen to Karen Purvis's voice, oh my goodness, she can be correcting you and you feel so blessed. How do you do that? But and she can be firm. You can be firm, but you don't have to be mean. And there are ways to correct kiddos and bring it playful, bring it back to playful as quickly as you can. But warm and friendly. because there's other things in these kiddos' backgrounds that they're going to be going to other places. Do you know what I'm talking about? When you use certain voices. So you're just trying to, now that doesn't mean that you're not going to have to be stern sometimes and, break up some kiddos that are monkeying around and need a little readjustment, but your voice is so powerful. So tell me, how can you use, let's talk a little bit, how do you use relationship, either eye contact, physical touch, voice? How are ways that you can use relationship? Because these kids need a trusting relationship. That's what takes the brain out of survival mode and into executive power thinking, which is where you want them. What are some practical things you can do? Know their name, yes. Know their name. Even if you got to put name tags on them every day. Every day, yes, ma'am.
Notice something that they're wearing or a tea that they, enjoy.
Yes, identify with them. I teach at the college level, but I do have fun, joking with them about different teams and different, just to break that ice and sports and things of that nature. Yes.
Also, say something positive about them, like I believe in you, great job, I recognize what you did, just kind of, because sometimes kids get a lot of criticism.
Right.
That they very seldom are praised.
It's kind of like that I Spy game. It needs to be genuine.
Yes.
But when we look for it, it's amazing what we find. Did you have something?
Yeah, a lot of times in changing classes, the kids will be coming in, they'll be going back and forth with each other, and if they're not respecting each other, you can be their defender. And you can kind of say, time out, that wasn't very, and ask them to apologize and say something nice.
And the best way to make that kind of interaction work is to be a little playful with it. Mm-hmm. Oh, buddy, I didn't think you really meant for it to sound like that, did you? Do a rerun, okay? Try it again. Oh, that sounds so good. Just have a little fun with it so that the other kiddos' defenses don't go, that mean so-and-so. It's not that we can't correct, we need to, but the way we do it. Anybody else? Ideas? Relationship? This is, I want you to live here. Brainstorm, because all of your environments are so different. Whether you're coming in the first thing of the day, coming in at the end of the day, whatever things are like, you got to keep this in mind.
Instead of using direction to tell them what not to do, tell them what to do. Like, don't run, could be it's time to walk. I mean, of course, it depends on age.
Right. We get so stuck in the no mode. Find that's a big key with kiddos that come from hard places. Find ways to say yes. And that's a way to say yes. Rather than saying, do not run, say, hey, let's all walk. Doesn't that just fry your brain? Because we're not used to thinking that way. The brain goes, woo. All right, let's move on. And hopefully I'm giving you ideas you're going to have to share with one another because I want to hit all three sections. Because the relationship, the goal here is to build trust. Okay? Your goal here, so things you can do to build trust. That's what you want to be thinking about relationally. And I looked at some physical things you can do, and then you jumped off into some other areas. And be interested in them and be consistent. Now we're going to look at felt safety. And both of those words are important because there's a difference. Felt safety. We're not just talking about safety, we're talking about felt safety. Let me illustrate. There was a family of 3 kiddos, and they were placed in a foster home. One of the board members of our ministry had them a couple of years ago. They don't have them right now. And she tells this story. The kiddos were in their home, and they're elementary aged. The oldest is probably, he's 11, and then the other 2 or 3 of them were just stair steps below him. And they had been removed from their home. There had actually been, I think there had been somehow a drug bust or something, and someone was shot and killed. Not either of their parents, but someone was shot and killed. Now, the kiddos are in this home, and every night, they're afraid. Okay? They're afraid. So every night, foster dad, foster mom, take the kiddos around to all the doors and all the windows so they can see that everything is locked. And they get that. They said, we're okay with this. We'll do it as long as we have to do it. But folks, nothing was changing. They were afraid every night. They were safe, weren't they? But they didn't feel safe. They didn't have felt safety. This is where you just have to be an investigator, okay? You have to always have your Sherlock Holmes hat on. Here's how it broke. They were running some errands one day, had all the kiddos in the car, and Glenn had to go to the bank. He went through the drive-thru, and he deposited a check and got some cash out. And the kids were full of questions. What is this? What are you doing? Why are you putting that in there? They had never been to a bank, never seen anybody using the teller, the tube. They were just in awe and put the check in. Well, why do you keep your money there? Well, so that it's safe, and I only get out what I need. And when he said, see it, so this is all I need this week. And the oldest boy said, so you don't keep all the rest of your money at the house? Are you getting it? Connecting the dots, right? Because his parents dealt with drugs. They didn't put that money in the bank. They kept it at the house. And they're always afraid, the money's at the house. And that night, the kids didn't even ask to check the locks. They felt safe. Isn't that profound? That's what felt safety is. It's in the eyes of the beholder. And that is an area that you have to keep in mind, felt safety. Now, and we just went over that difference between being safe and feeling safe. There are a couple of things you can do to help students, kiddos, feel safe. From a completely pragmatic standpoint, there are things that you can do in the environment and physical support. Here's something to keep in mind, because if the body is stressed, I may not be able to distinguish that means, oh man, I'm just really hungry or thirsty. I just might feel stressed and not safe. Things that we can do to help kids feel safe and also support them are making sure that they have proper hydration. Every 2 hours they have water. Every 2 hours they have a healthy snack. Now you're saying, wait a minute, you're going somewhere that I can't go. You know what? You're going to have to look at the day for the kiddos and when you're coming into them and how you're intersecting with them. Because do you have some topics that you talk about that threaten felt safety? So you want to put the kids in the best place possible to be able to fight that fight, flight, freeze. If they're really, really hungry or really, really thirsty, and especially with their body's already been impacted by this, they may already be on medications. And that means they're going to have a greater need for hydration than normal. And I'm just going to put, I don't know how it's going to, I know how some school teachers are operationalizing it at Reagan Elementary, but I don't know how it's going to operationalize for you.
Is this like transcendent across all age groups? So I'm assuming it's probably not for the high school. I know with mental, sometimes the instability could be less than the age, but where would you say that this line kind of changes?
I'm going to say you need to keep it in mind all the way through.
Okay.
If I am a teenager, I am hungry, I get hangry,
Right.
Yeah.
and I already have an attitude.
Yeah.
Okay? And we don't know. Do you know that we don't feel thirsty until we've been dehydrated enough to already impair our thinking?
Wow.
You don't feel thirsty until you've already been dehydrated enough to impair a little bit of your thinking, to feel sluggish, and already have effects. So even as adults, there goes the water, yeah. Another bottle of water. It's so important. Even the simple thing of staying hydrated. Did you have a comment in the back?
Oh, I deal with high schoolers daily. I run an alternative program inside our school for students that struggle in a regular classroom, and it is very imperative to provide those things for high schoolers, because they're on their own so much. I mean, you have no idea if they've been provided groceries. My room's a completely different room when I have like granola bars or water sitting out.
Right.
Because it's a safety thing too. It goes back to the relationship that they feel they have the control.
Right, and I don't have time to go into that whole issue, but kids that come from hard places a lot of times have issues with food, not because they had a lot of it, but because they didn't have enough of it.
Yeah.
And so our foster parents are told, you can't withhold food now. If kiddo wants food in the room, and I understand you don't want mice or ants or things, we've got to find a way to negotiate. So do we have a basket in the kitchen or a drawer in the kitchen that's all yours? It's a control thing about food, but I want that granola bar. Well, we're going to eat in 20 minutes, honey. So should I say no, I need to share some power here and say, you know what, Vicki, pick out the granola bar you want, stick it in your pocket, and bring it to the dinner table. And once we sit down to dinner, then you can have it with dinner. So she's got that granola bar in her pocket. That's power for her, okay? And you're right, it changes. We as adults, try it. Try it. Get hydrated every 2 hours and get a healthy snack. Change your life. It will change your life. It really will.
That's all I've been missing all these years.
That's
Some water and some granola.
There you go.
That's it.
Just a quick question, some of us are presenters, we're just guests in the classroom, so I'm not sure what we can do except to say, if it's okay with your teacher and you want to have a snack while I'm talking or during, I'm fine with it. I mean, I
Right.
don't
How
know
long are
that-
you in the classroom? For how long at the time?
A week, but
week,
the
and then how
class
long is your
period is
period?
usually 42 minutes, 45 minutes.
Okay. The one thing that you might want to consider is considering, can you negotiate with the teacher about making sure they've had a drink of water or something before you come in, or the little bottles of water. Can you also, okay, and this is why it doesn't always work, you have to put ground rules by it. There's some gum on the tables. Gum is really good to get out anxiousness, nervous energy, and allow us to focus. But do most schools allow it?
Yeah.
Because they don't put down ground rules clearly and practice those and role play those before they implement it, and then deal with it properly. They don't want to deal with the hassle. But that's why some of these tools are on the table. I know you need something to keep yourself focused, yes, to keep yourself awake, but sometimes we just need it just to deal with that anxiety. So I would start negotiating with, okay, what time of day am I in there? Have the kiddos already had something? Do they need something? Teacher, can they have a water break just before? Or can I bring in little bottles at least of water just to say, hey, take a sip, keep them hydrated? Because you're not only fighting against the trauma that they might have had, but your subject matter might be a cat hair. And you want them to feel safe. Now, in that moment, keep this in mind, give them voice. And I do want to get to my last segment, but I'm going to throw out this concept. When you hit a cat hair in your content, can you preempt that and think ahead? How can I give my students a way to communicate that to me, even in the moment? And I'm just going to throw out to you, depending on the age of the child, if they're older students, then you can give them all cards, 3x5 cards, and if you're bringing up something that's some kids, you talk about heroin and drug overdose, and they lost a mom to an OD, and their uncle's in jail because of it, and you're bringing up some stuff. Now, you still have to go over it, but you can preempt some of that by giving your kiddos a way to give you voice, whether it's jot down. You can jot a note to me in that moment if I'm touching on something that's real that's getting you a little anxious, you can preempt the whole thing, saying we're going to talk about a lot of things, and they might touch your life. Let me tell you, your body might get a little anxious. If you do, drink some of your water. Should help calm you down. Jot me a little note and put your name on it. That's what that card is for. Maybe it's you ask them, you can pick it up. Maybe it's red or whatever. Just pick it up and hold it up if it's just really bothering you, what I'm talking about, because I want to know, not that I can leave it out, but I want to help you through it. I don't know if teachers have places in their room that they allow kiddos to go and just, if they need to just sit in a quiet spot, maybe they can get up from their desk. And it's all different. But what I'm saying is you need to think of ways to give them voice, because the trauma that occurred to them gave them no voice. Okay, they didn't have a voice. And they need to know that they need to go through it, but they also need to know that you're not talking about this completely ignorant of their experience. You are talking about it knowing it may cause some stress. So you guys are creative. I'm going to put my email at the end so if you think of all your ideas on how you're implementing this in your classroom, please send it to me. Yes, ma'am.
It was just a couple of weeks ago when I talked about drugs, avoiding drugs, and a young man just, raised his hand and he just went, and it took me by surprise. I tried to, I wanted to keep a straight face, and what I did was said, thank you for the courage of sharing, and I apologize if this has been something that you have gone through, and hope you can learn from those choices and avoid that for yourself. That was the only thing, but it took me by surprise that he opened up and shared so much.
And some
right
will
there.
do that. Some will do that. But do you see how, if you've been preempting with all these other things, you've been trying to have relationship, and you've been trying to have a supportive environment, that when that happens, he obviously felt like he was in a safe place.
The
or he
teacher
wouldn't have said that.
identified him as one of the students. He wouldn't be surprised if he came to the school with a gun. And he said, he don't even talk. And he was shocked that
And
he just kind of opened up.
And
right
you
there.
connected with him, and he felt safe. Just like little Dane, at 11 years old, when he felt safe and he was able to give voice to his pain. Until that moment, he could not give voice. That young man gave voice to his pain, and that's where you want to get to. That's what's driving that anger. But he can overcome it. Yes?
I know I was shooting video, but I got to throw some feedback in there. I went through a lot as a kid, but one teacher did a couple of things for me that really helped me to this day. Took me to outside, to a quiet place, in the hallway. Close my eyes and take a deep breath. Inhale, hold it for 10 seconds, blow it out.
You're teaching my next section right there.
I do that when I coach. When a kid is losing it, I can tell it.
Yes.
That you can take a breath.
Yes. Yes, because the last thing that I had on the list was what?
Say it,
Self-regulation. Okay, and we talked about what do we do in content as a cat here, so we've been doing this. Self-regulation is the last thing on the list. We're going to hopefully look at this, and if for some reason it won't play, then you're going to look it up. We're going to be running close here. And this is self-regulation. So this is a study that's recreated. It was done in the 60s, and it's been followed for 40 years.
Okay, sit in that chair. All right, here's the deal. Marshmallow for you. You can either wait, and I'll give you another one if you wait, or you can eat it now. When I come back, I'll give you another one, so then you'll have two. But stay in here and stay in the chair till I come back, okay? All right. I'm gonna go do something and then I'll come back.
It smells yummy. It smells really good.
So it's up to you. You can have it now or you can wait. Okay? I'll be back. Stay in the chair, okay? Okay. All right, so I'm gonna leave and then I'll come back, okay? So you can either eat it right now or you can wait. Either way, okay? Okay. How'd you do? Did you do good? You did?
Yeah.
You wanted to eat it, didn't you? Yeah. So did I tell you to give you another one? Okay, now you can have both. You need them.
And delayed gratification, or on another aspect, self-regulation. And there are a host of tools that are so valuable to you, because isn't it true that what you're teaching these kiddos is to delay gratification? Now, this study was done in the 60s, and it was done by Dr. Walter Mischel at Stanford. He used 4- and 5-year-olds, but the most significant findings came decades later as he followed up those children to find out. Just like the most significant results for you would be decades later. How are these kiddos doing? So they did. They followed up, and they found out, as they continued to follow up, after a couple of decades, the children that were willing to delay gratification, that regulated, that had self-regulation, they waited until the researcher came back so that they could get 2 marshmallows instead of just 1. Those that waited ended up having higher SAT, ACT scores, lower levels, hear me, lower levels of substance abuse. That's where you're living, right? Lower likelihood of obesity, better response to stress, better social skills as reported by parents. Generally better scores in other life measures. They would give them, as they got old enough, they would give them a measurement to measure their satisfaction with life, and they had higher satisfaction. Lower dropout rates, more likely to be in a career or in college or beyond, whatever it may be. Just amazing results. All because of a little self-control. We're going to start with this, because this here to me is really key. Even when we hear some of the things about heroin and the heroin epidemic like we did this morning, part of it really comes down to how strong is our resolve? How strong is our self-control? And we know that kiddos that come from hard places, their self-regulation is a little messed up. Okay? Because they're used to fight, flight, or freeze. And so you need to be able to get to that aspect of self-regulation. And I'm going to give you some tools and strategies, and our kind videographer gave us one. You know, just deep breathing and a count to 10. You think these things are common, but they're not. So we're going to look through some tools for self-regulation, because whatever you're teaching these kids, if they don't learn to delay gratification, if they don't learn self-control, if they don't learn how to deal with that pressure and that stress, then what you're teaching them is going to So let me go over a few key things here. I'm going to throw them all up so you can write them down. I'm going to give you a couple of examples. Movement. It's a two-edged sword, okay? It's a two-edged sword, but you can use that to your advantage. I brought a little, I made this last year in Texas when I was in Dallas. Aren't you proud of me? Doing postgraduate work and we're making crafts. But I just use this as a visual. You want to keep your kiddos in the green zone. That means not too high and not about ready to go to sleep. Some of you are getting hungry. Eat some candy if you're going to go to sleep. That'll just give you a rev. Drink some water. But your goal is to keep them in the green zone. These kiddos don't know how to do that. Because do you know how they've lived life?
In the red zone.
Because they've had to. Or because of fight, flight, or freeze, they have, instead of fighting, they've been flighting so they don't have to feel. You got that? And you're trying to bring them here. If you can bring them here and teach them how to pull out of these two categories, you're teaching them to wait and not devour the marshmallow, not instant gratification. So movement helps, but because that gets the energy up. But if it gets too high, these kids have trouble regulating. So first, you have to regulate them. Then you move to co-regulation, and hopefully, eventually, like the snacks in the high school classroom, hopefully, eventually, you don't have to tell them when to take a drink or take a granola bar. Because they know, they feel it. Oh man, I need something. I need some protein. I need some whatever. Or, boy, I'm getting too, after a while, our videographer, he didn't have to have his teacher tell him, take deep breaths. He could feel it. He could feel that, and it's natural because maybe whatever fear was in his life made his downstairs brain really strong, and that's good because he survived, but he had to rein that in because it was reacting to other things too. So once he learned, deep breath. Little kids, tell them blow on their soup. It's a calming strategy, and that's 10 times, big kids don't blow on soup, they take deep breaths, okay? Another calming strategy, little kids, they can pull out their magic mustache. Do you know, there's a pressure point right there. And if you hold that pressure point for 10, I count to 10, it will calm you down. You say, well, how do I get a teenager to pull out a magic mustache? You don't. You ask them to strike the thinking pose. Okay? And count to 10. That's calming. There are also pressure points here. Here you see people, like this at the desk. That's actually, there's pressure points. It is calming. So you can teach calming strategies. So you've got the movement to get them up. That's okay. You can teach calming. You think, well, I'm not going to stand up and do jumping jacks. If they need a little revved up, you can just right in your chair. You can do a chair push-up. And that gets your energy level up a little bit. If you come into a classroom and they've been sitting there for a long time and you're going to teach and you want them in the green zone and they're looking at you like they're about ready to fall asleep, turn to their, well, be careful with this one depending on the age. Turn to their neighbor and do a thumb wrestle, or the hand slap game, or little chair push-ups. Think of a little thing to get them, but watch, because kiddos from trauma are going to rev faster. They're not going to know how to pull it down. So keep your calming strategies. Blow in the soup, pressure points. There's so many more that I could tell you, but you use some, the calming strategies. And you're teaching them self-regulation. You're teaching them how to rein it in. Wall push-ups may not be feasible for you, but wall push-ups are a good thing. And you're teaching them that not everything that comes into my body that my body wants to do, should I do. You got that? You're teaching them to go from here, survival, fight, flight, freeze, to thinking through, oh, now wait a minute, I'm really revved up. Should I? No, I'm going to think this through. I'm in the classroom, and I don't. You're trying to get them to executive brain, and the only way they can get to executive brain is if you get them out of fight, flight, or freeze. So if you can teach them how to self-regulate. Now, other things that you do, and we're going to talk briefly about this. How many of you use role play in your teaching? I would assume that a number of you do. That's a good tool, and I'm going to tell you why. It plays right into this. We tell foster parents and caregivers and church ministries and different people, don't give these kiddos a timeout to think about it for 2 reasons. Anybody think of 2 reasons why we really don't want to give a kiddo from hard places a timeout? Isolation. Now, sometimes I needed to do that to my kids because I needed a timeout. Give me a timeout, send me to my room, I needed to regulate, okay? 3 little boys were just climbing the walls. They've all got red hair. So does a little girl, you know, so it's isolation, and what else? What's the other problem when I say, you got a timeout, go think about it. Think about how you can do that better.
I think they're gonna go back to their.
What's that?
They're gonna go back down to their fight flyer.
They could. What am I asking them to do, though?
Ab-
But that's their
abstraction.
normal, so they're not gonna think about an alternative.
I always, this is how I picture this in my brain. So I tell you to, yeah, you don't take people's pencils and pens. That wasn't nice. Go think about how you could have done that. Nice. Done that better. So I isolate her. She doesn't need that. She needs connection. And I ask her to think about how she could do it differently. Do you know the cartoons where they have the thought, blub, blub, and the little bubble? It's empty. She's never seen anybody. I mean, in her world, if you don't take it, you don't get it. Do you understand tracking? So, role play is golden. Role play is golden because if they haven't seen it, they don't know what you're talking about. If you give them a time in, then I can say, you know, honey, we don't want to do that way. Tell you what, so why don't you come here by me, and I'm going to be working with other kiddos. Just come with me. Let's think through this. You know, now, why did you want to do that? Well, I wanted that pen. That's my favorite one, and she picked up. Okay, I get it. Could we do that a different way? Can we ask in a nice way? So I'm training you, and I'm giving her a time in, and when she's ready, when she's calmed down and, from the freaking out that she took her favorite purple pen, then I'll say, hey, you know what, sweetie, why don't we go back? I'm going to give her a redo. That's Grace, by another name. Let's go back, and let's ask her. I know it's your favorite pen, but she really likes it too. So maybe use please, and nice pretty voice, and we'll give her a chance. Now, you ask her for the pen nicely, and you tell her. Ask her for the pen. Oh, pen, please. Oh, she said no. Now what do you do? Okay. Now what do you do? Huh? That's where the last one comes into play. Choices. I want to steer this in a direction, but I want to give choices. Okay, well, I tell you what. If you don't want to give it to her right now, she really loves that pen. What about in 2 minutes? You use it for 2 minutes, and then we'll let her use it for 2 minutes, and we keep going back and forth. See, we've negotiated and given some choices. In their world, they may not have ever seen that before. But your role play is golden. And when a kid is stonewalling you, like she says no, and even if I ask again, well, she asked nicely, no. You can pull your power play, can't you? And, well, give me that pen. You can do that, but it's not going to teach her anything. It's your power, right? You can share it. Now, she was going to share the pen. Did you get that? Both choices had the same result, but she had more what? She had a little more control. When she comes from trauma, she doesn't want to be out of control. Okay? So much we could cover. We lopped 15 minutes off of it and just went a few minutes over. So I'm going to put my last, I'm going to take that question, I'm going to put my last screen up because you guys are great with ideas. This is me, and if you have ideas or questions, there's 3 ways to get in touch with me. sbouquet@bethelchapel.com is my personal email. My university email is sbouquet@ashland.edu. Or if you can't remember either of those or can't remember my name, then you have to keep in mind fosteringfamilyministries.org. That's our website. When you send an inquiry on that website, it goes to me. We have some resources on there and are posting more. We offer a lot of training locally that uses these types of skills, and I'm building a portal on that website that includes training for our volunteers to be able to access. Yes, your question.
My daughter is in education right now. She's about ready to graduate. And
Oh, I know.